So the objectives for this demonstration are to explain the basic Pro Tools session file structure, show you how to power up Pro Tools, navigate the Pro Tools menu system, recognize and work with the main Pro Tools windows, understand the edit tools and edit modes, and display desired timescales, time-based rulers and MIDI controls. If I navigate down to my toolbar, I can load up Pro Tools. It's already open. Usually when Pro Tools opens, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't look like it's doing anything anyway, because it doesn't, as a default, doesn't open a session. So we have to go to File and Create New, like so. So we've got a number of options in this window. There's this new function. Later versions of Pro Tools have had this now, where you can work online, but that requires an account with Avid, or you can just work locally, meaning recording onto your hard drive, your local hard drive, which is what I tend to do. Some people are actually doing this and finding this very, very useful, especially obviously for collaboration. We have here recent projects and projects in the cloud, and of course we can always create from template, and there are various different templates. You can save your own templates as well, and there's different groupings for templates depending on what you're doing. The file type default is BWAV, broadcast WAV. There is an option for AIFF, but well, there's no discernible difference between the quality of the two, so I'd leave it as BWAV. So with BWAV, with broadcast WAV, you have a timestamp on the file, so you can drag a file in, drop it on the workspace, and it should sort of snap to where it was recorded. Sample rates, well, Pro Tools actually goes from 44.1 up to 192. On my laptop it goes up to 96. Broadcast standard sample rate is 48, so I usually go for 48, 24-bit. If you do get a chance to experiment, try recording at 88.2 or even 96 if you're doing a project and you want to experiment. But if you're working to picture, or just as a general standard sort of base, if you like, 48, 24-bit. And I/O setting, be careful about last used, because you never know what the last used was, especially if you're working in a recording studio. If you go into this setting, you'll find in the recording studios we have a list, and it will say Audient Main I/O, which will give you 16 or 24 inputs and outputs. So you have discrete channels for each of your channel strips on the desk. If you're working at home, then it's usually just stereo. If you're working on a laptop, it's usually just stereo. But of course, some of you might be working in surround, so you'll see surround sound I/O settings. And just be careful to make sure that you get that right at this point, because if you then need to, if you load a session with the wrong I/O and then you need to make an adjustment, it can be quite confusing. So just make sure that you can get the right one here first. Interleave, so split mono or interleaved, I think I'm going to leave that unchecked. And location, it's going into my it's going onto my desktop, so I'm going to make sure that it's going to where I want it to go and not somewhere else. If you're working in the recording studios, you won't be able to record onto desktop, you'll have to record onto student drive. And go to create the session, and when you create the session, you can see that it's created a folder here on the desktop, and we get our Pro Tools session file, which has the PTX extension. We have our wave cache file created in the session folder, which stores the waveform display data and allows the session to be opened more quickly. And audio files up here, so the audio files, either WAV or AIFF. Video files, so if you are working to picture, it's always useful to keep the video together with the Pro Tools project, so it opens with the video. And session backups, at the moment there's none. maybe now there might be one, not yet, but usually the default is it backs up every 5 minutes, and I'm not sure how many backups you can have. Maybe about 99, I think. Um, Always good to leave on session file backup, and it will do it in the background, and it shouldn't affect your recording session. So just leave that on. Bounce files. So we created. So these are for our bounce to discs mixes. So again, if you're doing a print of your mix, it'll keep it in with the project always. And your clip groups here, which created from clips grouped together in Pro Tools, and they can be exported. And I think that's about everything. MIDI files, of course, if you're working with MIDI, you can have a MIDI file folder here, and Sibelius files as well. They can be exported from Pro Tools schools for editing in Sibelius. You can have those as well. And I think that's all of them. And a rendered file folder. So if you're working with Elastic Audio, you might find you'll get a rendered file here folder. Otherwise, those are the defaults. Here's my blues session, my template that I've just loaded. And before I start recording, I might want to do some optimization of my computer just to make sure that I'm getting the best possible for performance. If I go up to setup, which I'm not recording, my screen capture won't let me record menus at the top, but I'm in setup. And if I just drop down to playback engine, you'll see here you've got your hardware buffer size, and it's defaulted to 1024 samples. So generally, as a rule of thumb, on record you set a low buffer size so that you don't get latency, so there's no noticeable lag, if you like, between the recording and what you hear. So you'd have a lower buffer size on record and then a higher one on mixdown when you're using plugins, lots of plugins, and you need to maximize the plugin count by reallocating host-based processing. So always good to look in there. My playback engine output now, I'm just using the built-in output, but if you're using a Pro Tools rig or another sound audio interface, you'll see that in here. So I'm recording actually using a little zoom thing, so that's down here. If you're not getting any sound, then perhaps you want to check that as well. And that's always one thing just to look for. Other things in this setup window which I always find useful, the disk allocation, making sure that it's recordings are going where I want them to go, and also the I/O setup, the input output setup. So I'm just using stereo input and output, but if you've got a session with multiple inputs and outputs, you might, or you're doing surround sound, you might want to just have a check there to see if everything's okay. Let's have a look at the menu structure. So we have the file menu, opening, creating and saving sessions. The edit menu, so for copying, pasting, duplicating and trimming selections. View, displaying and hiding parts of Pro Tools windows. Track menu for creating and duplicating, deleting and modifying tracks. Clip menu for arranging, grouping, looping and modifying clips. Event for modifying time and tempo, MIDI and audio events. Audio Suite menu, that's for accessing Audio Suite plugins. Option menu for toggling, editing, record, playback options, setup, configuring settings in a dialog box. Window menu for displaying and arranging Pro Tools windows. Marketplace menu for accessing the Avid store and Avid account, which is becoming increasingly more Avid's business model to work with to, you know, a subscription based rather than purchasing the software. I get you on a monthly subscription, and so that you might be using that quite often. And at the very end here, the help menu, so links to Pro Tools documentation. We have three main Pro Tools windows. We have the edit window, which is this one showing now. That displays waveforms for the audio in your session, and it's used to work directly with audio, MIDI and video files on tracks. Then if we go to window, we can choose mix, or we can use probably one of the most used shortcuts, and that's command equals. So if I go to command equals, I bring up the mix window, and that displays tracks as mixer strips and provides inserts, sends, input output information, panning and volume faders. And you can see floating around at the bottom here, I have a transport window which provides buttons or functions for transport controls, and it also provides counters and MIDI control displays. If I go back to the edit window using my command equals shortcut, what I have here then is at the top I have a toolbar. It's called a toolbar, and just below that here I have my timeline, which is currently set to show bars and beats, and tempo, and meter and markers. Either side, if I just go down here and click this arrow down here, and there's another one over here, I get my side columns, and on this side here it's my track display, and down the bottom here groups, and over the other side here I have my clips. Back onto tracks here, I can hide tracks, so I can, if I hide those drums, they still play but I can't see them, so that sometimes catches people out. At the top here I've got my edit tools in here, and over here where it says shuffle, spot, slip and grid, those are my edit modes. Back down to tracks, I've got a track pop-up menu, and then here I've got my track list. Down here with groups, I've got an edit group pop-up menu and a group list, and over here a clips pop-up menu, very useful for sorting your clips. And then if I had audio, I would, well, you can see there's MIDI there, but this is my clip list. Just close those. The ruler view has time-based rulers, and also what they call conductor rulers, which are the tempo, meter and markers, and I can add key and chords as well, or I could just go to alt if I wanted to. So you've got your time-based and also your conductor rulers, and then we have our transport control down here, which gives us stop, play, record, back to the beginning, jump to the end, fast forward, rewind, and for synchronization. So if I wanted to run Pro Tools in tandem with, say, a radar hard disk recording device, I can sync it so you have a sort of a master-slave relationship, so one controls the other. That's what that's for. And then over here we've got our MIDI controls. And because of my screen resolution, some of the tools that otherwise would load up as default are missing, but I can modify this control bar just by going over here and then clicking. So let's say I want my zoom tools, click, and it squeezes them in down here, so it's just shuffled everything along a bit. And here are my zoom tools, so I can zoom in on waveforms, and I can have presets as I wish. If I then just go into the mixer window, we've got inserts at the top of the channel, then we've got sends, and then we've got input and output. So that's really signal routing controls up to that point. And then as we go down here, we've got automation, pan, record enable, solo, mute buttons, and then volume fader. The mixer window also has the sidebar. So the mixer window, side column, track pop-up, track list, and groups. Transport window, this thing here, which I've already done. On the transport bar, we also have one of these disclosure triangles where we can add additional editor windows, so MIDI editor window and score edit windows. The score edit window is pretty neat because it lets you view, edit and print MIDI data as notation. So it just depends on what you're working on at the time. Finally, just look at these edit tools. We have this, which is the zoomer tool. If I click and hold, it allows me to zoom in and out on an area of a track. If I hold down option, I can zoom out, and if I double clicked, I can fill the edit window with the longest track, like so. Over here we have the trim tool, so that trims excess audio, MIDI or video content from a clip. This is the selector tool, which positions the playback cursor on or selections in a track. And then we have over here the grabber tool, which selects and positions entire clips. Over here we have the scrubber tool, so it allows you to scrub across audio to find an audio event, and a pencil tool, which allows you to redraw waveform data and to create and edit MIDI data and automation. And this thing here around the three of these is called a smart tool, and that provides instant access to the scrubber tool, the grabber and trim tools, and it's activated when they all three are blue. So it just depends where you are on the waveform. Over here on the left we have our edit mode features, and these affect the movement and placement of audio clips, MIDI notes and video clips. And they also affect how edit commands such as copy, paste, etc. and edit tools such as the trimmer, selector and grabber and pencil tool function. So we have 4 edit modes. We have shuffle mode, which is clip movement is constrained by other clips. We have slip mode, which is when clips can be moved and edited freely without affecting the placement of other clips. We have spot mode, so that clips can be moved or placed by specifying a location in a dialog box, and grid mode, where clips are snapped to the nearest grid boundary when moved. Earlier we just looked at the main time scale, so this determines the Timebase units used for the main counter, transport functions, selection displays, pre and post roll amounts of grid and nudge values. And these can be set to bars, beats, minutes, seconds, timecode, feet and frames, or samples. So if I just pop to my view menu, I go to main counter, I can then change that. As you can see, that's just changed. Or I can click here where there's a little disclosure triangle and select it from there. There's also, in that window, there's also sub-time scales, so it provides a secondary timing reference. And as you can see, you've got your ruler display options, so time-based rulers, conductor rulers, and we can go again to choose view and rulers and desired rulers from here. Back down to the transport, just looking at this corner over here. So we have here the count-off controls, the meter display, the tempo field, and then here we have wait for note, metronome, MIDI merge, looks like somebody swimming front crawl, and the tempo ruler enabler, the conductor track.